Today's reading is taken from Luke chapter 19, verses 1 to 10. He entered Jericho and was passing through. And there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. And he was seeking to see who Jesus was. But on account of the crowd he could not, because he was small in stature. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. So when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all grumbled, "He has gone to be the guest of a man who is a sinner." And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, "Behold, Lord, half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold." And Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost."
Thanks for reading, Ed. This picture that's going to come up is Simon. He came to speak to us at Euston a couple of years ago about his life story. He'd been a policeman, but he realized there was more money to be made in becoming a thief rather than spending your time catching them. And Simon was very honest about the dubious individual he was at that time in his life, immersed in the criminal world, adulterous. He actually left his wife at the moment she needed him the most, when one of her parents was terminally ill. And then Simon had an encounter with Jesus Christ. His snappy way of summing up his own story was to say that I had a career change, became a criminal, before I had a life change, became a Christian. This is a new 3-week series to kick off our new church year. Reach, Build, Send is the series, and that's because Reach, Build, Send is how we summarize our vision as a church, reaching out with the gospel, building each other up as mature disciples, and then being sent out to serve. It'll be an unusual series in that we're breaking our normal pattern of working through chapters and books of the Bible consecutively. We'll resume that normal habit in 3 weeks' time as we begin a series in Revelation that will take us through most of the year. But I hope actually we'll see in these next 3 weeks that our mission is actually God's mission, that he is the great visionary and strategist, thankfully. And I hope we'll find that this is timely, partly because it's 10 years since Euston Church was planted this very month. We'll be looking back in thanks in a couple of weeks' time. But it's also a chance for us to reflect. Have we wearied in aspects of our vision? Have we forgotten important things or started to take them for granted? There's also the fact that this is a time when many of you are new to church. As I said earlier, we're thrilled that you're with us. I hope this series will really help you get under the skin of what we're trying to be about. And then, of course, we're in this uncertain COVID world with lots of conversations about having to reimagine church. We'll see, I hope, that we don't need to panic, and we certainly don't need to reimagine God's unchanging mission. Today, reaching out, and I love this encounter, Zacchaeus, the patron saint of small people. And I've brought us here today because the punchline is maybe the clearest you get in the whole of Luke's gospel in terms of a mission statement directly from the lips of Jesus. Do you see what it says? For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. We want our mission to be on board with his. We want to have the same agenda for London and the world that the Son of Man has. Well, the Son of Man comes with a reach out agenda, coming down and seeking out the lost. Lost people like Zacchaeus first. He was the same kind of lost character as Simon, the cop turned crook. Verse 2 tells us he was a tax collector. And that information in itself would have been enough to mean that Zacchaeus was defriended, unfollowed, cancelled, labelled, #sinner. And I'm aware that there's probably ruder words people have used to describe their taxman over the years, but all the noises are that Zacchaeus was the worst kind of sinner. Verse 2 says he was a chief tax collector. Don't feel sorry for him as if he was only obeying orders. He'd well and truly climbed the greasy pole. And it says he was rich, because creaming off extra couple of percentage, ZAT, Zacchaeus added tax, was a nice little fraudulent bonus. His own words, verse 8, a defrauder. I tend to imagine Zacchaeus as a bit of a lovable little rogue. In my head, he's Diego Maradona. But no, if you happen to live in his tax district and you're struggling to pay the bills, this rat bag would be in the same category that we would put the rapist or the paedophile. Lost. But lost people like Zacchaeus are exactly who Jesus has come seeking out. Remember why the Son of Man came? Initially, it seems like the other way round. It's Zacchaeus who's doing the seeking in verse 3. And this is where we get the famous sycamore tree moment. You know, when I was at Bible college, a group of us had to reenact this scene in front of a drama teacher. And I had to play Zacchaeus. They clearly thought I was already in character with the small man syndrome. Anyway, it is ripe to be made into a production here as he's up the tree, and on from stage left strolls Jesus. And who's seeking who now? Verse 5. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. I wonder if we rewound the footage to just a little bit before Jesus showed up. Maybe other people passing by also looked up. What kind of things did they say? Probably not printable, most of it. Maybe a few stones lobbed up in Zacchaeus' direction. Certainly grumbling. Jesus reaches the spot. As he looks up, he sees an individual who is desperately in need of salvation. And Jesus doesn't mess around. Notice it's basically get down and get the kettle on. We've got things to discuss. Zacchaeus probably fell out of the tree with the shock. And was it an awkward journey home as Zacchaeus is thinking about those fiddled tax papers stuffed below the sofa that the Son of Man is about to be sitting on? The Son of Man, that title Jesus uses for himself in verse 10, that's the name that says he's the ruler of the whole universe, all authority over all people for all time. Here then is the Lord of everything stepping down off his throne in heaven and walking in the front door of grubby little Zacchaeus' house. How's that for a mighty act of reaching out? And we know by verse 6 we're not getting out of this before its mission accomplished, which it is. There's the joy, there's tangible repentance, there's calling Jesus Lord. And Jesus himself sums up what just happened in verse 9. today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. He also, even him, this local gangster who seemed a million miles from God, he also a son of Abraham, which is to say he's Bible royalty. All the promises, the privileges, the seat at the table of God for all eternity. It's a great story, isn't it? And I wonder if, like me, you just love watching Jesus in action on mission. So proactive and intentional. So willing to get in among the lost, go to his house, and so bold. This visit from the Son of Man could rightfully have been all about condemnation. And there clearly was a tough call to repentance and change, but made in the context of a gracious invitation to salvation in the family of God. You know, this incident gives me a lot of confidence, because reaching the lost, let's be totally honest, it can be a frightening, disappointing roller coaster of a mission, can't it? Some of you have fed back that this is a weaker area, perhaps, for us as a church than building up and sending out. I think we mustn't shrink from that critique. And it would be good to discuss together some of the reasons for that and what we can do. But let's be honest, evangelism made easy is never a place we're going to get to, because that is a lie. It's never easy, no matter how much outreach is our focus. And I don't know the kind of thoughts you're thinking at the moment. Maybe, my friends just aren't interested. My hopes that they'd all wake up spiritually during lockdown have been dashed. I can't even be in a room physically with the colleagues that I'm supposed to be reaching out to. We always say the streets around Bloomsbury here are teeming with people to reach. Well, they're not so much right now. Our ministry seems to have been impeded. Jesus, are you going to be behind us for the next 10 years, Lord? Are you still committed to the cause? One of the things that this story reminds me is that it's his cause. Jesus was in the business of reaching the lost long before we were. And we're not actually asking him to get on board with our project. We're trying to keep on track with his. That doesn't mean it will always be easy just because it's his project. But how committed is Jesus to reaching lost students, families, workers, homeless guys? How much is he bothered? Well, you can tell precisely how much when you see him in action here, and when you hear him himself say the whole reason why he came. Verse 10 again, for the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. And that mission statement and what Jesus does here crystallizes a great missional pattern that you see developed through the whole of Luke and Acts, the follow-up volume, where the initiative is Jesus's, the momentum is outward to the lost scumbags, the Gentiles, the Romans, and where the result is, again and again, joy as lives and eternities are transformed. And actually, this is the story of the last 2,000 years, as every category of lost individual, as all kinds of off-the-rail nations, even empires, have been gripped by an encounter with the Son of Man. And you are part of that story because, yes, lost people like Zacchaeus, but also lost people like us. I guess this is you or me perched up in the tree in the story. And I don't expect many of us, like Zacchaeus, are dodgy tax collectors, but some of us might have a financial background that's as dubious as his. Or in another way, you've been a cheat, or have things in your relationship history or browsing history that make you deeply ashamed. Actually, even if you've been a Christian and outwardly quite respectable for as long as you remember, you've still got a heart like Zacchaeus's, haven't you? I don't know how the summer's been for most of you, haven't had a chance to catch up yet. But imagine those people in verse 7 walking past and seeing you up in the tree. And then if we replayed on your phone, everything from your last 7 days, every action, every word, every thought. How much would they have to watch before they started grumbling sinner about you? How much would they need to see before they'd be shocked that Jesus would ever want to be a guest at the house of someone like you? Lost is exactly the way to sum up my natural self, and you know that's you as well, if you're honest. And that's why verses 9 to 10 are actually the story of every Christian. Obviously, the precise details of how Jesus found you will vary. For some of you, wonderfully, the story started here at Euston Church during these past 10 years. But your story may not involve sycamores or you having been a crooked cop. But impossibly lost you were, clueless, and then reached out to by Jesus, who came looking for me, turned me into a child of Abraham, and changed me. And you may not think that you've changed very much yet, but how much worse would you be without Jesus in your life? I was lost, but Jesus found me, found the sheep that went astray, threw his loving arms around me, drew me back into his way. That's my story. It's yours if you trust him. If you've never trusted him, make it yours. Come to him if you've never done that before. And you know, if we want to persevere, if we want to grow in being better as a church at reaching outward, that doesn't begin with evangelism training techniques or a mission action plan. It begins with returning to and dwelling on the way that we have been reached out to in the gospel. As I rejoice in all that I've been saved from and brought into, that my wondrous story would bubble out of me and be something I tell to others. That as I'm humbled again about my own situation, I will well up again with energy and compassion towards other lost souls who need this salvation just as desperately as I do. Lost people like them, that has to be our final point. And we've taken this as us in the shoes of Zacchaeus so far, but there's another place we might be standing in the story, verse 7. When they saw it, they all grumbled. He's gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. Well, the local religious grumps are disgusted that Jesus should take hospitality off this lowlife. And in some ways, they're right. Jesus doesn't pretend he's anything other than hopelessly lost, needing to change. But the grumblers need to understand that the Son of Man precisely came to save lost people like this. It's the whole reason he's here. I was just thinking, in verse 7, they're not that different, are they, from our so-called cancel culture that's quick to ostracize the offensive celebrity. And of course, it's right to call out prejudice and injustice. But we're self-righteous when we do that in a way that forgets we all deserve to be cancelled, naturally. I think a Christian response in a so-called woke generation will always have to look very distinctive and be quick to say the big problem there is lostness. The big need of that person or group is salvation, as mine is too. In other words, will we see people through the eyes of Jesus? We won't be motivated to reach out to anyone without Jesus' worldview. And that's why next week is as important as this, because we need to keep being built up in the worldview of the gospel if we're going to stay missionally sharp. And then will we follow Jesus' mission action plan? You know, there's so much here that's a model of evangelism that follows this in the New Testament. The way he's so proactive. Been very easy to hunker down and turn inwards during lockdown, hasn't it? He goes to Zacchaeus' turf, now expecting him to have to come to me. Jesus doesn't shy away from the ouch truths. I wonder, do we clearly make the call to repent that Zacchaeus obviously heard loud and clear? And we see here the wideness of who Jesus thinks his salvation is for. He also, no one too crooked or too independently minded or too down and out or upwardly mobile. The ones who don't speak English, the students with a short attention span, the creatives, the online community, the street population, the ones who seem quite nice and sorted already, and the ones who've recently had their world shaken. How are we going to reach them? We'll have a lot more time on Wednesday to share joys and fears and experiences on all of this. I know that there have been highs and lows in personal outreach during lockdown, and thanks again to Charlene for sharing some of those. Actual neighbourhoods have become a bigger mission field for some of us. And some of us have been surprised at who's been tuning into church. Do you know, they never expected Zacchaeus to be the one in Jericho. Can I ask you who's the person you'd be most surprised to find out had been tuning into these services? What is it about them that makes you so surprised? And I rebuke myself as I say that the extent to which I think that that person is beyond salvation is the extent to which I haven't yet got my head around what Jesus' mission is. His mission hasn't changed. And that means that today salvation can come to this dysfunctional family, this promiscuous residence, this very secular workplace. Because they also, even them, can become a child of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost.